So yes, so thank you for coming inside on this lovely, very summer-like May evening for our nature program series. Before I hand things over to tonight's presenter, I want to thank our nature program series sponsors, Ragged Mountain Equipment, Hancock Lumber, and this is the first time I get to say this one as well, White Mountain Oil and Propane just joined us as a nature program series sponsor. So we're very excited and appreciative of their support. They have always been supportive, but have just come on board this year as a nature program series sponsor. So I'd like to thank them for that. And we have, I can't even think what we have coming up. We have actually this weekend, this Saturday, Lori, our executive director, is leading a wildflower walk up at Moose Brook State Park in Gorham. So that is happening Saturday morning, which should be a good time. There are still a few slots left in that if anyone would like to join us for that walk. So we are excited for that. And then our next evening program we have scheduled is on Thursday, June 10th. And we have the director of the New Hampshire Lakes Association talking about New Hampshire lake health and how to safely recreate on New Hampshire's many lakes. So a very seasonally appropriate program. Tonight, we are excited to have Dana and Bob Fox back, and they will be talking about, sort of our Birds of the World series, talking about their trip to the Lesser Antilles, which I've just learned. I knew they had sort of slid it in right before things shut down, but I didn't realize just quite how close they were cutting it in taking their trip. So I will go ahead and turn things over to Dana.
I want to thank you, Nora, and thank you to Tin Mountain for this opportunity. Bob and I are really delighted to share our experiences with 10 marvelous islands, the Lesser Antilles. You can see them depicted on the right side of this particular screen, and the ones we visited stretched from Barbuda in the north to Grenada in the south. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the Caribbean, the Lesser Antilles, the geological formation of the Lesser Antilles, the islands we visited, a little about sugar and rum, and then we'll conclude. So here we are. This shows you the full Caribbean, the Lesser Antilles and the Greater Antilles. The Greater Antilles are those to the north, and the Lesser Antilles you can see are over here on the right, stretching out in an arc from the ones we visited, as I said, from Antigua down to Grenada. Now, Bob is going to share with you some of how this evolved.
As the Earth cooled, it formed a certain number of plates. In fact, its surface was covered with plates, the continents with thick ones and the oceans with very thin ones. And forces under the plates move them around to some extent. They break up and they do various other things. But this first picture here, it's labeled late Cretaceous. That's really 75 million years ago. There's a Pacific plate in general and a Caribbean plate, which was just sort of getting broken out of it. And you can see how they pushed between the North and South America, which has been pretty well solid there. Those little red marks that are scattered around there, those are volcanoes, because when a plate moves, it does create both trenches and the volcanoes that come up at that point. Going over to the Paleocene of the next one, that would be 60 million years ago, and it is forced through a lot more. You can see it's moving out into the ocean. You can see even part of Cuba starting to get formed. Down to the one at the bottom left here now, that's 35 million years ago. And you can see the plate has really gone through the area and is pushing straight east, so to speak, with all those little red volcanoes there starting to get active, and some of those light areas being ridges of various sorts. And when you finally get over to the middle Miocene, you've got it moving farther, and the present area shows the whole thing working the way it's supposed to. You can see that the Caribbean plate itself doesn't seem to include much of Cuba, but it does include Puerto Rico up there and the Lesser Antilles, and that's where the action is, and that's where we're going to be working tonight. As you can see, they all call these arcs, and certainly the line of islands here do look like arcs. But you notice that Barbuda and Antigua don't seem to be quite in the arc. They seem to be out a little bit because they seem to be a result of maybe an even earlier movement of some of the plates. And you can see Barbados down here in the lower right. That is considered by the tourists, that's part of the Lesser Antilles, and really the main base to get in and out of the Lesser Antilles. However, that sitting is a bunch of coral reefs that is sitting just on the surface. Barbados is just the surface of a long ridge. So these are what are considered the islands, but geologically they're a little bit different in various places. Personal tours, you can see, included 4 islands, and then Victor Emmanuel then Sea Cloud tour covered another 5. And you wonder how we did that. It's an amazing story about how Dana could manage to do things, because we thought if the event is only going to cover half the islands, we should see the other half. So Dana became a tour leader and a tour organizer all in one, and went and developed tour leaders, local tour leaders to be there, people, places to eat, places to stay, boats to take, airlines to take, and the whole thing went out without a hitch. And so that part of our organization was really a Dana tour as far as that goes.
And actually, I forgot to include Martinique in that list. So there were 6 islands that were part of the Bent trip. And I'm going to share with you a little experience about our trip to Antigua. This is the island we flew into from Boston via Miami. And the airport there is depicted up in the upper right-hand corner of the island. We were picked up by our local guide, and he took us to a hotel. And the next morning we got up and actually flew to Barbuda, but we'll stay for the moment with Antigua. It means Spanish in ancient in Spanish, and they became independent from England in 1981, and there are about 108 square miles. In the picture below, you can see hills and the way the land has been carved out. It's a very attractive island, and it was a very pleasant stay. We actually came back the next day, a later day, and birded over a good part of the island. So that was fun. There were banana quits, and you'll notice that banana quits in our pictures, amazingly how they vary from island to island. I was touched to find that they have created Mount Obama. When our previous president Obama became elected, they were very thrilled on this island, and this Mount Obama is the highest mountain on the island. The wife of our guide, local guide, Andrea, and I enjoyed a great walk through the Obama woods there. A couple of the birds that we saw on the island. This green-throated Carib is one of the hummingbirds that we saw, and it is an extremely attractive bird when you get that light on it, and it lights up that throat so beautifully. The little blue heron is just like our little blue heron here in that we see periodically in the Northeast, but it was there along this lake in Englishtown. I just couldn't resist including this picture. This is a real cattle egret. Notice it standing in the shade of this cattle. I just think that's, it touches my fancy there. And then I feel so sorry for that cow. Look at all those insects that are invading its derriere. And I think that cattle had a difficult time living in the Caribbean and thriving there because of all of the insects and the temperature. Now, Bob is going to share with you some thoughts about Barbuda.
As you can see, it's sort of an oval island, and it has an airport down in the lower left corner there, and we have to fly in. It's not much of a flight. It's like 20 minutes from Antigua over, but it's quite different. While Antigua has hills, we'd call them hills more up here, Barbuda is as flat as a pancake. It has practically no trees on it, which is another thing that's very noticeable. And that's partly because of the 2017 hurricane that really cleaned the island off. They lost a lot of houses and many, many trees. So it was like a brown desert when we landed in the airport. Here we are, we're in our huge plane, Dana getting off the plane. It was a great day, and you can see that this is a big plane for down in the Lesser Antilles. So things are small that way and go that way. That one didn't happen to be our luggage. But one thing we found out, we landed on a Sunday, and there's no taxis, there's no buses, and very little is open. In other words, Sunday is really a quiet day on Barbuda. The only difficulty was it was 95 degrees. Now, for a couple of birds that are there, the great kingbird, people would say that's very much like our kingbird up here, and it is very closely related. But the great kingbird is found throughout the Antilles, greater and lesser, and even in South Florida. But it is not up here, but it looks just very much like the eastern kingbird that we have here. The carib grackle also is widespread through the Antilles. It's a cute blackbird and can be seen. And that, in other words, I started taking pictures as soon as we left the airport, just not knowing what was going to happen and what we were going to see. These turned out fairly well. Now we have two dove pigeon type things. What I'm put these in for is how things can move around in the Caribbean. The collared dove arrived 30 years ago in the Bahamas, up there off of Florida. And in 30 years, it managed to move all the way across to the Lesser Antilles, where I was photographing it. The white-crowned pigeon here, which is a beautiful bird, and it was in, or is in Puerto Rico, and is just beginning to get into the Lesser Antilles. So you can see that birds, even that are introduced, move around, and the populations change quickly. Now we're going out to a frigate bird colony. This is really a treat. Frigate birds, there are 4 or 5 species in the world, but ours is called the magnificent frigate bird, and I guess people would say it is, though it looks like the others quite a bit. Of course, we go out in a high-speed motorboat here. No, it's just a regular thing. And when we are going by the mangroves here, you can see the nest. Now, most of this area was destroyed in the hurricane of a few years ago. So this has been rebuilt quite considerably. The thing that you always see pictures of is the male frigate bird with its red front. Now that's simply a puff or a air sac that they can inflate. What they do is they inflate that, and that is meant to attract the females, and it can be seen from a mile away, so it is rather effective. So here's a couple of very close families living together, the various male frigate birds in the stick nest, and a young, which is this little white thing. It's white, and it gradually develops color as it gets older. In this next picture, you'll see the female is on the left. The female is a white head and white breasts. You don't think of it that way, but because of the one on the right is what you tend to do. But there's some interesting things about this one. One of the fact is that the female has the white on it, but they breed every other year. Now that doesn't sound like birds particularly, but when they have an egg, they have one egg, and it takes 50 years, just 50 days to incubate it. It must seem like 50 years to the bird. And so they are not a fast growing sort of a family, but on the Barbuda colony here, there's about 5,000 birds, which is about 2/3 of all of the ones for the Caribbean and South America. So we're quite pleased in having seen it and been around, and you can really get in and see what it looks like. Now, one of the things that has taken over, it's a relatively rare bird called a little egret that has arrived in the area very recently, but for some reason it has decided to nest in the same mangrove areas as that. You can tell it's not one of ours, particularly because in this time of year, it has just two little feathers coming off the head. Those plumes will develop into two long feathers in the height of breeding season, but most of the time it's this sort of a bird. It's not anything quite like that we have up here, though they have been seen now to a certain extent. Now we get into some of the land birds. We walked for probably an hour or so in 95-degree heat. The two leaders were promising that, oh, we'll find the birds. We've had it here. And they showed us very trees where it had been, but it wasn't. By accident, I took a picture of a bird in a tree as we were walking by, which turned out to be one of the wobblers, but we didn't know it until we got up to the next area, and we were just about done in. Most of the trees had died, and so we sat under one of the trees there we were, and Junior Prosper was our guide, and his wife was the lady that you saw before, and she was taking pictures of us as well as of the Barbuda warbler that was there in the tree there. So this is a type of way, but it is a very difficult way to find a bird. But there we were, and we certainly enjoyed. That's the one endemic bird for the island, and we were very pleased to see it. Now, you may wonder when you look at it, and people have marveled over this, that the birds look almost alike. In fact, they thought they were alike. Not alone were the two that were in the Lesser Antilles, but they thought they were like the ones in the Antilles warbler that is in Puerto Rico. You can see the pictures of the three of these off to the side, and they do look somewhat different. But what happens is, as long as the population stays the same, the birds aren't going to change. But if the birds get isolated on an island, and the island birds are going to evolve at a rate differently from the basic birds that we have. And so in the case of Antilles, Barbuda, and what Dana will talk about later, the St. Lucia warbler, are all very closely related and probably have evolved one from the other. The Gracious warbler up in the corner is really the source of all of these birds, we feel, and that's a bird of our Southwest United States. So you can see like how the birds have moved over, and that the Lesser Antilles are sort of the end line of a lot of the birds that we want to see. Montserrat is now, we're out of those flat islands, so to speak, and we're up into the mountain type islands. These are volcanoes. in many cases, active volcanoes that are there. So you always think about them being volcanoes, but you don't always think of this British colony being just natives of all sorts. But it's funny that a large group came from Ireland when it was as a British colony, and for some reason they all landed up in Montserrat. And so I would say probably half the white population there is from Ireland in one way or another. So they celebrate St. Patrick's Day, something that I don't think the people that celebrate it around here realize. Now they have the volcano on the island erupted in 1997. That's quite recent, and it has caused things. This is a picture of it from the ocean now, a picture of the mountain that's a few miles back from the coast. You can see by the map down there where it says volcano and shows that in the south central part of the mountain, the island is this thing. And the place that we're going to look at next is farther up north on the island. And it's the area that's going to keep track of what's going on the island.
I think also this map depicts where the observatory is that we did. And when that volcano erupted back in 1997, it destroyed the capital city, which was over here to the left south on the southern side there. And it just wiped out the whole city of Plymouth, Montserrat.
Here's a picture of what it looks like. This was taken, the building on the left was built to monitor the volcano. A volcano, if monitored, can be very well predicted as to what it's doing. It has earthquakes of various types and various little small activities before anything tragic has happened. But this was the 1997 eruption, and it certainly was a spectacular one. The picture was taken with a telephoto lens from this observatory, where we spent some time seeing a lot of pictures about the island and so forth. Interestingly enough, our leader was from the area that was very affected by it. So he and all the people down in Plymouth were evacuated to England in many cases. So he spent half a dozen years over there before he returned to the island and was our guide. He was a great one. Here's the mountain the way it would look today, taken right from the observatory. That's not anything happening to it. That's clouds being forced up over a mountain, which would happen anywhere in the world. But you can see it's a green island. And there is a lot of growth going on, and it is a very attractive looking island. Now, there are a lot of birds on it, but in this case, I'm just going to focus on one, and that is the Oriole. Now, there are 7 Orioles in the West Indies, 4 in the Lesser Antilles and 3 in the Greater Antilles. And all of these are smaller than our Baltimore Oriole or anything of that sort. Not tiny, but much smaller. But they've got the same general pattern of black and orange in the adults, and the females being a lighter, more buffy color. But I thought they were going to be hard to find. The book said everything about how difficult they were to find. Deep in the forest, you might come across one if you were lucky. And so as soon as our guide picked us up in the morning, I said, is there any chance that we're going to get the Montserrat Oriole? And he said, well, I think so. And in 5 minutes, he had 4 or 5 birds for us. I couldn't believe it. And these the male and female were the ones I photographed right out off the bat. And they were just beautiful birds and very much like miniature Baltimore Orioles. Now, this is the sort of the lava flow type thing. The volcano was off to the left, and you can see how barren this area is. But it is, you can tell the gray volcanic rock is there and so forth and so on. And that's where it came down into the ocean. We had a very good view of that. The detailed picture over here on the right is me feeling quite warm, and our guide being very happy to have me with us. And you can see over our hat, there it is. But the one thing we noticed that we didn't get anywhere else on our trip was this bird, the red-billed tropic bird. There were about a dozen of them coming in, flying around those rocks and so forth. And we were told that they nest there, and they were coming in to nest. A rather beautiful bird, and very hard to find, and we never found it on our full trip. So this was one bird that we like to get.
The next island we visited was Grenada. We flew from Antigua all the way to the southern end of that chain of islands to this island, and we landed down in the southeastern portion of the island where there is that one airport, and we were picked up again by our local guide, and had a very, very pleasant hotel that they put us up in. The next morning he picked us up and he took us up to the green area, the southern edge of this green area with these two green dots. And we had a very productive morning birding up in that area. And later in the day, we birded down in this area to the east of the airport, and we'll show you pictures of those two things. Here again is a beautiful picture. You can see hilly and lovely beaches. There was a little local color at when we were up in the hills in the morning there. This lady was very happy to come and greet us and show us some of the local produce there. There is a lesser Antillean tanager, which is a bird that was seen in this southern island and also in the next most southern one, which we were actually one of the ones that we sailed to. There is a scaly breasted thrasher, thrashers, mockingbirds, and another family of another member of that family of birds called Tremblers were very impressive birds that we saw there on the island. And this was a lifer. Our trip was focusing on either the endemic or the nearly endemic species that were all, of course, almost all, certainly for me, lifers. And you can see what a wonderful picture this is of that particular bird. I love that scaly throat you can see. House wren. Now this is the Grenada form. Notice the rich color on this one. And on most of the islands, each of the house wrens was a separate subspecies. Someday they're going to get to separating them, and I'm sure they'll all become separate species. So these are sort of birds that are in the bank for us in terms of being able to have another species in our life list. But it was both the songs and the plumage of these house wrens differ, and sometimes substantially so, from island to island. Now, here is the second hummingbird of the Lesser Antilles, this Antillean crested hummingbird. What a cutie. My goodness, look at that little puffy head here, how he is really got his crest up, and look how his throat feathers are positioned. They're really quite an impressive hummingbird there. So that's the second Caribbean specialty, Lesser Antillean specialty that we had. Now this is the brown trembler. I just mentioned that tremblers, thrashers, and mockingbirds are in the same family, and they're very special, these tremblers, to the Lesser Antilles, and this is the brown one.
The reason they call them tremblers is no, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, the reason is because they actually shake. You see them sort of sitting there, are standing there, and their wings sort of flutter, and I mean they look like they're just falling apart. They vibrate and do that way for a few minutes, and then they stop and look like regular birds again. So they sort of are off again, on again, tremblers.
Now, that area that was down to the southeast, to the east rather, of the airport is a very special wildlife preserve that has been created just for this particular bird. This is a very rare dove, and at the moment it's being threatened by development in the area. It's questionable whether this bird will ever survive and have enough habitat in which to live. We walked along paths in that particular sanctuary looking for it. Bob was fortunate that he got a look at one, not a grand look, but a look at one. But unfortunately, it was just something I didn't get on. So he has this bird on his life list and I don't, but it's a rather attractive dove, and they were there in the dry habitat of that southern part of the island. This is our local guide, Vaughn Francis, who was an excellent guide. And one of the birds that we saw with him up in the hill area was the Grenada Flycatcher. Now, this bird is similar to the lesser Antillean flycatcher, but it just shows how speciation occurs when there is separation. When a bird is isolated, often there will be that slow genetic change and creating a new species. So this is the Grenada Flycatcher. We saw it also on St. Vincent. So it's in the southernmost portion of the Lesser Antilles. We then flew the next morning over to Barbados. And this is a picture taken actually on the day we were leaving, but you can see we're up at what is called Gun Hill. And these guns, old guns, are still here. They were used, there was, the local plantation people were frightened that there would be some rebellion or some attack from the ocean. And they had this fortified hillside there. You can see another banana quit up here. And the one endemic bird on the island of Barbados is this Barbados Bullfinch. Now, look what's behind this. This is a chair. This picture was taken by me at breakfast. When we first arrived on the island of Barbados, we were taken to this very nice hotel where we spent the night. And we hadn't had a really good full breakfast for a while. So we went to the breakfast, which was outside. And there, right there, we had absolutely no effort seeing the one endemic bird that we needed to. It's a rather drab looking bird, but a big bill, a big bullfinch bill. And it just presented itself on the table as we were sitting having breakfast. I'd like to digress a bit from the birds for a minute because sugar and rum were very, very important things that occurred, sugarcane, sugar production, and also rum distilling. Now, the sugarcane was actually a giant grass, and it was first discovered and domesticated in New Guinea, but it was later grown in many places. India, in Africa, it's growing in the southern US even, it's growing in, and in this case, there was a plantation owner, a planter named James Drax, and he had been on Barbados for a few years and was growing the typical plants of the Caribbean. And he heard about sugarcane being grown in Brazil. So he went to Brazil, and the Dutch and the Portuguese there had developed a way of growing it and a way to process it. And he brought back plants. So Barbados was the beginning of sugar growing in the Lesser Antilles. And it's a very sad story in many ways, because many of the people that came, particularly English and French, were not the high-minded people of those countries. They were often people that were escaping or trying to, that had failed in whatever they were doing and were trying to set off anew. And there were some that were sort of despicable. So we had a very strange group of people that populated the islands. We also then, of course, had the introduction of slaves. And this sugarcane takes a tremendous number of people to raise it. And what they do is they actually grow the sugarcane, and then a tremendous number of workers in those days were sent out to cut it, and they would bring it in on oxen cars, and they would crush it with crushers and rollers twice to get all of the juice. And they said that 60% of the juice came out in the first time they did it, and they got another 20% more of the juice when they crushed it the second time. And then they would take that juice and they would pass them through a series of moving from larger to smaller boiling copper pots that were kept burning. Wood was put under them, and they burned 6 days a week. Sundays, they took the day off, and eventually they caused crystalline sugar to form. By the time they got through to the last one, the process would take about a week. And interestingly enough, molasses was a byproduct. And the weekly production, they calculated, was generally about 5,500 gallons of cane juice from 200 tons of cane. Now, here are some old pictures on the left showing first the harvesting of the cane, and see the number of people. Here's an oxen car here. Here's obviously the planter. And then they would take it to the processing facility. Notice it's stone, and some of these had windmills, and they actually were able to sometimes even move the windmills by oxen pushing this rods around. You can see the cane coming in here in the oxen carts and being brought up and put into the crushing, rolling portion of it. And here's the modern day harvesting of sugarcane there on the island that we saw in Barbados. No people, you can see, whatsoever required. This is a restored processing facility, windmill there in Antigua. And here is another old picture of a large windmill type processing facility with the cane and the oxens there. It's a fascinating thing to see these stone towers and to imagine how that occurred. So the crushing and extraction began here. Then there was a separate facility for just boiling it. And then finally, they would build a distillery to process the molasses. These sugar plantations were something to look at. And we actually visited one of them. And this picture here in the center shows the dining room table all set out with this beautiful china glasses. I forget how many people, about 25 people that could sit at this table. This was the living room of this plantation. This had been restored by a gentleman it was despicable, the plantation, it appears, when he found it, but we were all taken and showed this. He has obviously painted these rooms and decorated them very, very attractive. He said he had 27 windows, doors and windows on the first floor, and a lot of the ventilation that occurred was merely by the ability to open up all of these doors and get wind from any direction. Now, rum, it appears back in 350 BC, was in India. They were actually fermenting sugar to get rum. The Lesser Antilles sugar barons produced a great deal of molasses, and that's what they used to make rum. The plantation used many slaves, and slave traders liked to be paid in rum. But interestingly enough, by the 1700s, New England imported the molasses instead of the rum, and there were over 100 distilleries here in New England. And 80% of New England's exports by the 1700s were of rum. So here we are. One of our participants was a great rum aficionado. He assembled a great group of different types of rums, and we were having a rum tasting on board the ship as we were sailing from one island to another. This is the marvelous Sea Cloud. Victor Manuel Nature Tours rented this boat for our group. There were about 50 of us and about that many crew. We were lucky enough to stay in this room. It was actually quite amazing how we got to this room. I had booked just a general room, and then I discovered that there were 2 single beds in the room that couldn't be moved closer together. That's my strategy for survival at night. If I tap Bob on the shoulder, sleeping close to him, he will turn on his side and not snore. But when you're on the opposite sides of a room, there are just so many pillows you can use to catch his attention. So I was looking for a single bed, and it appeared that only one of the 4 major rooms that were owned by the original person that built this were available. I negotiated, and we ended up in this beautiful room, and even Bob thought it was lovely. So here we are looking up the sails twice. They took put up the sails, and we've sailed under full the 4 masts here. It was just extraordinary to see them unfurl these and then furl them again. Here we are at rest, and we're up on the upper deck now. Often we would have lunch on the upper deck, and there was a formal dining room. So this was the vent route. As we started in Barbados. We had a day at sea to get up here, and we went to Dominica, Guadalupe, then we came back down to Martinique, to St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and back to Barbados. So that was the route that we took on that boat.
Now, obviously, we're at sea for much of the time, and so you wonder exactly what you're going to see when you're going along in the boat between islands. And the main thing that you see are boobies. There are 3 or 4 kinds of boobies. Now, that's a crazy sort of a name. And actually, it seems that it turned out that the Spaniards, who were out looking at birds almost before the Europeans the rest of the Europeans got going, began to call them boo-boos. And in Spanish, anyway, that's what they were. And that meant a stupid, lazy bird that would walk around and just hang around every place. It's a very negative sort of a term. And yet these boobies that they have are interesting in all the way because they are long distance flyers. And you can see them going along here. If you've got some fish off the boat a little bit, you'll see these birds coming by, 2 or 3 species of them sometimes. and they like get us up here. They do plunge diving. In other words, they'll see a fish and go down, drop 50 feet maybe, and into the ocean and grab that fish if they can do so. So these birds that are probably in the rather tropical areas of the oceans all around the world. They're over in the Pacific and all of that, so they're not too different in any one place. But this bird on the left turned out to be a very odd one. I was talking up on the boat with the head bird person, David, and he was saying that when you go by Dominica, he said, sometimes you see a white moth, the red-footed booby. Normally it would have black wings, but this bird would do that. And I thought, well, boy, I will keep my eye out, but I never saw it that way until I was sitting listening to a lecture after lunch one day. And suddenly there was sort of a window out that I could see what was going on. And suddenly out in that window was this almost all white bird just turning in circles around. And it was really white. I mean, it was flashily white. And it turned out to be one of the very rare red-footed boobies of the white moth. And so David was right in saying that's where it would be. And it was really a sight to behold. Now, they do have tropic birds. You've seen the red-billed tropic bird. And now we have the white-tailed tropic bird. And those two, they're like terns are perhaps around here. And that you see them flying in the ocean. And there's other birds, but these were the ones that was probably the most obvious because they would sort of follow us, hoping that we'd scare up some fish.
Now, as I said, the first island that we visited once we got to have that day at sea was the Dominica. And it's the most mountainous one. It's the wettest. And it has 3 different microclimates up the hill. And we sailed into Cabritz, which is up in the top left here of the island, and went to the Syndicate Reserve Estate. And Cabritz is in the right-hand map on the upper left there. And then the Syndicate area is just south of that. So we had a bus waiting for us, and it took us there. This is how it looked as you sailed into the island. And some of the birds that we had in Dominica, there's a lesser Antillean bullfinch. Remember, we had the Barbados Bullfinch a little while ago. Again, that big bill and quite an attractive red and black bird. There is another endemic warbler there, the Plumbeous warbler. It obviously doesn't have any yellow like the ones that Bob showed you in that ones he illustrated earlier. But this is a endemic warbler of the Dominica. Now we were taken up to this Syndicate Estate, and Bob's going to tell you a little about our visit there.
Okay, as Dana just mentioned, the forests are tropical and then semi-temperate. And this is the tropical forest that we go through all the time. And this is our group going along, and that's fine. And it's a very good way of getting to see the birds and see that. And in that area, if we work hard enough, we will come across this red-throated parrot. Red-necked parrot. And I'm interested in parrots, so I'll take just a moment to talk about that. Parrots are like they're big birds, and all the parrots that we have in the Caribbean and Northern South America and also in Central America, most of them are called, they're in a group of parrots that are big types that are called Amazonias. I mean, that's just sort of a large grouping. There's about 27 or 30 Amazonias, and they're all in this area. And most of the parrots on the islands are certainly Amazonias. And this one is one of the rather pretty ones. Most of them are all green, but this is that way, and you tend to see them. Now, these parrots had several enemies or several problems. Let's put it that way. Number one, they are not many. Some of them are down to maybe 100 or a couple of hundred on an area. Now, you may say, well, that's probably good enough. However, the hurricanes come through quite frequently. This is in the hurricane territory, and it will, between damaging the trees and occasionally killing, even bashing a parrot against a tree, it is very tough on them. And the storms do damage. The people that are on the island, like everywhere else in the world, they seem to be taking woodlands and developing it into fields and so forth and so on. And indeed, they grew sugar on this island, as they did most of them. So the islands are losing their big forest, and that is not good for big parrots. And the last thing that comes along that you would never think of as a threat is they are pets. What that means is that the natives will go out and try and catch, and either from an egg or catch them when they're very young at the nest and take them home and raise them. You'll say, well, that's nice. At least they're giving them a good home. Not at all. What they do is they sell them. And if you want to buy a nice, pretty little parrot like this one, 1,000 will not even touch you. $2,500 to $3,000 is what the good parrots go for on the black market, and they're sold all over the world, including a lot in New York City. Now, I'm going to tell a little story because I like parrots, and as you can tell. And what happened is there was the ideal parrot, the most important parrot to me, and in all of the parrots in the world, and certainly among these Amazonias, is one parrot that lived in this area. Now, their numbers at one point got down to 50 and maybe a little below that on this island. And if you couldn't see them very well. And the second thing is they weren't in the tropical areas, which is the lower area. These were partway up the mountain. And so you had to climb a lot to get it. And so the leader knew that, this David knew that I was very much interested in getting this particular bird called the Imperial Parrot. Who wouldn't want to go and see something imperial? Well, anyway, so I kept saying, that's that. But when the day came to go, he said, Bob, you and Dana and quite a few of these people here probably cannot climb the mile and a quarter that it takes to get up to see them. And what we hope to do is get up there, and there's some little opening areas. The birds fly only usually in the very early morning, and they may come out and sit on the trees, or at least and see a flyby of one of the birds and get it that way. But I really don't think you should go. You may slow the group up, and perish the thought, if you should break a leg or twist an ankle or something, it'll be very difficult for all of us to get down. Well, obviously I was crushed by that idea, but I could understand the reason of it, but that didn't make it any better from that point of view. But anyway, they went off, and we went and worked in lower altitude areas and the tropical areas, and did have parrots down there like the one you just saw. And that was fine, but it was not the one I wanted. And so about 11 o'clock, we met up with his group coming down. And instead of having all these stories about how wonderful it was and, what you missed, they said, we didn't get a parrot. They didn't hear, see, or even smell one parrot up on the high altitude. And they were feeling even worse maybe than I had been about going up on there. So anyway, we looked around at various birds, and then one of the leaders came over to David and said, I've got an idea that if you want to take a short walk up, and there's a little area that has a big sort of a glen or a notch or a big valley on it. And he said, sometimes you can get them up in that area. And as everyone wants to see it, it would be worth it. And so we started out, and David beckoned to both Dana and me, come on, this is your chance now to retrieve it. But with very little hope of getting it, we climbed for about 20 minutes and then got into this heavy wooded forest. This is what we're in looking right now. And right over the edge of where I'm looking is the deep. It's about a 200 to 300 foot gully or valley or whatever you want to call it, going down the mountain to the left. And so it was sort of a pathway perhaps for the parrots. Well, we got up there and a dozen of us were standing around, and after about 10 minutes, people were saying, this is sort of a waste of time and it isn't doing something. Suddenly, you could begin to hear them. You didn't hear one, you maybe heard 4 or 5 sort of talking back. Parrots are noisy birds, and so you can hear them, and sometimes they're far away. And they said, wow, here it is. And nothing more happened. You could hear them and they stopped, and you could hear them and they stopped. So some of the people said, well, I'll count the bird as a herd bird, and they went down the hill. But a few of us stayed on up there. Now, David was on the edge, past where that little camera thing is, and he was hanging out over the edge. He had one arm around a tree, and he was sort of tucked around the thing, and he had his camera and his field glasses on his side, one arm holding the tree, the other using the field glasses to see what was happening. And so he sat there for 10 minutes or so, and suddenly the noise increased. And the way it worked out is a bird came up, and here it is. We had it for about 3 seconds. In other words, like this. Here it is, it's going by, it's gone. 3 seconds about to see this bird. It was a marvel bird. It was huge. It was flying hard. It got a great hard flap, and that was wonderful. So when I was heading back, I said, David, if you had only had 2 hands, I bet you could have gotten your camera on the thing. And he said, well, and he sort of let that go. Later that afternoon, when things were quiet, he said, Bob, I want to show you something. And he showed me this picture. And I said, wow, I said, that is my bird and a very good thing. And he said, it is going to be your bird. He said, and you're going to get a copy of the picture, this picture, and of a lot of the birds I've been taking. I want you to really enjoy it because you so enjoy seeing it. So that was the story.
And the flag in the lower right-hand side of this particular slide shows that the parrot is on their flag, the country's flag, and there is a great deal of effort that is being spent on many of these islands to rear these parrots in captivity, to release them, and to encourage the local people to protect them. And it's a wonderful story to see how the numbers have been increasing on quite a few of these islands. Now, on the way back from seeing that parrot, I was sort of at the back of one group, and suddenly there were these tall pink flowers that were in bloom, these flowers on the right. And oh my God, a blue-headed hummingbird, another hummingbird of the Lesser Antilles, actually came in and fed on these flowers. I got Bob on it, and I think 1 or 2 other people got to see it, but it was exciting. It was, and these flowers were growing right amongst these huge, huge trees. So it was a very exciting moment for me. And this is the island of Dominica as we set sail, and the moon is rising over the island. Now, the next island we went to was Guadalupe, and we sailed into Puerto Pitra, and we then got in a bus and we drove over to this second half of the island, the Bastille, and we you can see the circle here. We were up on a forested road up on the hillside, and Guadalupe is actually a French protectorate. So you can see the point a picture over here, and then we are on this forest road. This again is a beautiful picture of the island, and you can see the hillsides, the beaches, just wonderful there. And believe it or not, we were in a parking lot of a little shop, and they had put food on some rocks and on the far side of the parking lot. And there, these special birds, this bridal quail dove, you can see how close it is to a couple of the participants. They were walking back and forth on the far side of the parking lot. It was an amazing thing to see them so close. And isn't that a beautiful dove? That is really a lovely dove. There was also a special thrush, the forest thrush. And have you ever seen a more delicate and gorgeous pattern of this scalloping here on the breast of this particular thrush? It's a very, very impressive thrush to see. And on this island, there is, and there are not many woodpeckers in the Lesser Antilles at all, but this Guadalupe woodpecker has evolved on this island. You can see it's black. It has a little bit of purpley here on the throat, but it was a very, very dramatically beautiful woodpecker that we got to see across the street from the parking lot down in a little campground area. After we were there up on the forest road, we were taken down to these gardens. They are a wonderful tropical garden. They even have a little rail line that they take you around through the gardens, and or you can walk on a trail. They're lush. We had this Lesser Antillean saltator there. Saltators are not too distant from tanagers. Here is a pearly-eyed thrasher. So remember, the tremblers, the thrashers, and the mockingbirds are related, and this is the pearly-eyed one. What a beady eye that is. And these all were impressive birds to me. Another hummingbird. Now the picture on the right is the same species as the picture on the left. Bob took this picture on the right, and just in and of itself, that is an absolutely beautiful hummingbird. But you turn this bird and you can, maybe if you think hard, you could see, but when it gets in light lit up, this iridescent throat absolutely just is gorgeous. And David Ascanio, our chief bird leader, took this picture. And then look what he found. The blue wings of that hummingbird and this very, very dull, in this case, beautiful purple throat feeding on this tropical tree. What a picture. I just think that's one of the most beautiful pictures I've seen on this trip, or of this trip. Now, the next island that we visited was Martinique. Drop the mouse. See if we can get back to Martinique. Martinique, and again, we sailed into Port-au-France, and we took a bus ride across the island, and we went out to this little protuberance here, this peninsula. And we were out in this area and walking along on in this area. There's one road that went from the main road coming into the preserve, and then we walked down the hills towards the water to look for a special bird. This again is a French protectorate. Now, Bob wants to tell you a little bit about the volcanoes on this particular island, and also, as you can see, St. Vincent below.
Okay, the volcanoes are classified. You may think a volcano as a volcano, but the more you get into this sort of thing, the more interesting they became. And the one that I was most interested in the top one, is a Pelion, because Mount Pearly is in the northern part of the island that you just saw on the map. Now, this was a very famous eruption, but what makes it dangerous and very dangerous is they have not alone they see practically no lava is coming out of the thing, but what they have is Nouvelle Pendes, and that is a series of hot gases. And what those do is they come down the mountain and flow on, and they're more dangerous than any kind of even the ash that they come from it. Incidentally, you may notice that on the St. Vincent, right in the middle, right above the arrow there, they mention Nouvelle too. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about Nouvelle. It is a bowl of hot gas. You may say, well, so what? Well, it is considerably hotter than you may think. And they can get it up to about 800 or 900 degrees temperature, which is a hugely temperature. And the other thing is it has a gas connected with it. And so it is poisonous if you get near it. Now, you don't want to get near it. However, it moves at about 300 miles per hour. And so when one of these starts down the hill, it'll go down the mountain and go across the land and do a lot of damage to you. I'll take the one example. The St. Pierre was the biggest, one of the best shipping areas in the Lesser Antilles, a wonderful port, deep water port. It was for tourists. Most of the food and goods that came in and out of the whole Lesser Antilles went through St. Pierre. And they had 28,000 people. They were making a lot of money. It was a great little town, and everyone loved it. And back in 1902, in the spring of 1902, there was going to be an election. The election was the governor was up for re-election, and he was doing not too well. In fact, he was losing. He was losing the vote, and so we had to get the things from St. Pierre. And the upshot of the thing was he came up and tried to reassure them, because it was causing some rumbles around. They were getting afraid of it. But he said, no, it's perfectly good. He and a lot of people walked up there and so forth. Anyway, on the 8 o'clock in the morning, when they were going to have the final election, the thing erupted with one tremendous flash and a bang, and it wasn't much lava. It was a lot of ash, but this Nouvelle came down, and what it did is that 28,000 people were there in the thing. A telephone call was made by a person to see how the voting was going, and as soon as he finished the sentence, he said he suddenly heard a lot of screams, and almost 2 seconds later, he heard groans and complete silence. That was one description of exactly what happened. 28,000 people died in 2 breaths. That is one of the worst disasters. It's almost like Vesuvius way back in the old days. And Vesuvius had the same problem. It is the gas that does the job, even more than the ashes and everything else. One quick thing, yellow warblers are the biggest, most widespread warbler we have. But down in the tropical areas, like out in the Antilles and even down into South America, you have 2 groups of birds that are not usually seen up here. And one of them we call golden. It's a much more goldy color, and it has a red top to its head, or chestnutty red head. Then there's another one called the mangrove group, and that too is there. And only on this island in the Lesser Antilles do you get the mangrove group. But in the course of events, There's probably 15 or 16 subspecies or species of warbler of each type that you don't even know about. So I thought I'd throw those in because you see yellow warblers in the daytime and don't realize this is going on.
Now we have another white-breasted thrasher. These are rather fun birds, and you can see them displaying down in the lower right, another member of the thrashers, and a bird that, again, is really quite specific to its habitat, and we're really concerned about this particular bird and its survival in the Caribbean. On the island of St. Lucia, it's probably considered to be the most beautiful. It's a sovereign nation. It was named after St. Lucy of Syracuse, AD 283 to 304. Again, we sailed into the islands over here, and we went up into this area, in this area here to bird. The thing that is so famous about St. Lucia are these pitons. These are old volcanoes. They are absolutely monumental. They are picturesque. They really give this island a great perspective. Now here is the St. Lucia warbler, the third warbler that Bob talked about, that was part of that group that came in from and evolved into different species on different islands. We also have a St. Lucia house wren, and we have a St. Lucia Oriole, quite a bit darker than the Montserrat Oriole. There is a black finch, again, these thick finch bill, St. Lucia blackfinch, another endemic, and here is the female of that species. Not many of them, and we had to work hard to get this, but this was a great one. Another trembler is birds. You can see the feathers here on this bird. Just as you can see how he's trembling. The feathers are just loose and shaking. And again, just wonderful family and a very impressive bird. There is a lesser Antillean peewee, the St. Lucia race. This is the race that's in other islands, but the St. Lucia race is this much richer orangey color. And we had two other flycatchers, the Caribbean Alania and the lesser Antillean flycatcher that we saw on most of the islands. There is a parrot, and the St. Lucia parrot is one that they're again working to save, and it was one that we were fortunate to be able to see, and this was a great treat to be able to be brought to see these. These were along a country road, and they were nesting in the side of the road. Our last island that we visited was St. Vincent. We sailed into Kingston, and we went up here into this area north of Grand Bombom. This is a picture from the New York Times taken just a couple weeks ago. This is the island that is suffering from one of these great eruptions of their here it is up here. So we were way down in the southern end, just up here on the west, southwestern side, whereas this is where the volcano is erupting. While we were there walking out to see, guess what, another parrot, we came across the Grenada Flycatcher, which is one we had seen in Grenada. And we also were very fortunate to have the services of Lystra Kulzak, another local guide. And we're so impressed with the local guides that we came across. The St. Vincent Parrot. Some folks got up very early in the morning and went out and did a walk that they left the boat in the dark, but we went on a shorter trail and we got distant views of the parrots, as did they. These are not pictures taken by the group there. And you can see that there is even a parrot protection program and that the enforcement people are trying to protect this parrot. We then went to a local botanical garden. We even saw a Baltimore Oriole there. And as all good things have to come to an end eventually, as the sun set over the Caribbean, it is going to set on our talk. And we think back on those wonderful memories of the birds and the people. We hope you've enjoyed exploring the islands with us and some of the pictures of these special birds. And hopefully it will entice you to want to go on this. We want to thank Nora for inviting us, for Tin Mountain for hosting us, and for all of you for watching. So we thank you so much. And Nora, the field is yours. If people have any questions.
All right. Thank you, Dana and Bob, so much for sharing that your trip with us. So yes, as I said, we will open it up for questions. And actually, to start things off, one of the questions I have for you is just, I know you mentioned that some of the photos were your own, some of them were, were from some of the tour guides. What were you taking photographs with?
I have just my cell phone and I'm not competing with Bob. Bob has his Canon SD50, that Canon that is used, that has the great magnification power. Nothing like the cameras that Rick and Charlie Nims and others are carrying there. So this is that compact one that is, but those excellent pictures were taken by people with big lenses and from guides, both from Vent, also from field guides, and from the BirdQuest.
All right, great. Do other folks have questions for Bob and Dana?
What was the favorite bird that you both saw?
Your favorite bird?
Oh, that parrot, Imperial Parrot.
Yeah, I think I knew Bob's answer.
Yeah. Bird I loved to see for 20 years, and now I saw it.
I suspect mine were the hummingbirds. I really found those to be little jewels, and that lesser Antillean, the crested one was so cute. The purple-throated Carib, you could see how dramatic that was, seeing it sitting and then suddenly alive as it was feeding on the local plants. So that was ours.
Oh, fun. And Dana, how many, I know you sort of showed them, geographically as you were visiting the islands, but how many species, different species of hummingbirds did you see in your trip?
I think it was 5.
5.
There. And we also, our trip for the 4 islands and for the 6 islands for Vent was really focused on seeing the endemic or near endemic and the specialty birds. And for Bob and I, we had about 30 lifers on this particular trip. So it's not a huge list as compared to, say, when I went to Kenya for the first time, and we had 600 birds. So we had, I forget what the total was there, 150 or so species, but 30 were lifers. So we're getting down to be just a little bit more appreciative of any lifer, not just gross numbers of lifers.
All right. Any other questions for Dana or Bob?
I came in a little bit late, so I apologize if you said this early on. What time of year were you there?
We were there, Lori, just as the pandemic closure began.
Oh, jeez. Really? Okay.
It was March 13th that we
Yeah.
arrived home, and I was telling Nora before we began that we were one of the last folks in, and we got from Barbados to Miami. In Miami, it was a zoo. They only had 2 of the passport checking terminal places there open out of 25 that would.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And who had closed down, and put away a lot of staff. And so we waited and waited and waited in these closely snaking lines, when COVID was, God knows, whether it was inside you or not. And we missed our connection. We fortunately got on another plane that night, but it was hairy. And, we got home at 2 or 3 in the morning, not having
Wow.
anticipated it. So that's what we left on February 28th.
Mhm.
And
So, okay, go ahead.
ideally, I would have liked to have spent longer on each island. It was nice being on the boat for 6 of the islands. You didn't have to, pack and unpack, and you always had your good place to sleep and good food, and that was all taken care of. But you did still have to have the time to get from island to island, and we never really spent a lot of time on an island. But
I was kind of curious if you had seen, I guess migration probably had already started in terms of neotropical birds coming back up here. So did you see any common birds that we would see around here?
we didn't see any real big migration.
No, but eBird and their system that is doing it, our birds were being sent into eBird, and the best bird as far as eBird was concerned was a Baltimore Oriole.
Yeah.
Can't believe it. Right at the very end when we were in that park, and that was a start. I mean, it was just accidental, and we said, "Oh, it's great! Isn't it much bigger than the local Orioles?" But when we got the report back from eBird, that was the star bird as far as they were concerned.
That's funny.
It wasn't like when we were in the Amazon and we saw hundreds of eastern kingbirds one
Yeah.
day, and there you really had the feeling of, oh my heavens, they're moving north. I mean, it's
Yeah.
quite a powerful emotion when you can see lots of birds, and you sort of wonder if that one of those is the one that's on my pond in Tuttenborough there.
Yeah. Huh. Oh, that's cool. Thank you.
Dana, following up on James's question of favorite birds, of all the islands that you visited, and I know you said you were only that, you would have liked to have spent time on, more time on all of them. Which one, in your short visit was your favorite?
That's hard. Each one was different, and they were so different that you could almost pick any one of them and make a case for it. St. Lucia possibly could have been mine, partly because of a friend of ours, Alan Keith, had spent, he wrote a book on the island and had spent quite a bit of time there 25, 30 years ago. And so we knew a little bit more about that and what Alan has been telling us about it. So that was only for that reason. It wasn't for any technical reason. It was just sort of an emotional one.
Now,
Mhm.
Barbuda is not beautiful, and you know it had 90% of the housing and buildings were affected in 2017 by that hurricane. So that one, I was so glad to have been there to see the frigate birds and to find that wobbler. But that wouldn't have been my favorite. I really enjoyed being with our guide on Montserrat. That he was really quite a impressive person, and we did get to have some nice birding experiences there. But they were all, you know, and every single guide, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, had preceded this, and we were there, and all of our guides were local people of color, and they were absolutely wonderful. It was the nicest feeling to be there and to find all of these people doing such a wonderful job at guiding, and just a delight to be with. It was such a good experience. And as someone pointed out to me, it's interesting how life is different when you're in the majority. And I was reading on one of the islands that 90 some odd percent of the people were Black and 1% were white. And so, you know, when you have such a disparity in one direction, and it just was such a wonderful feeling.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your trip with us, and you know, giving us all things to aspire to, and you know, and lifeguards to seek out. Yes, and
Before we go, is that there
yes.
is an organization that is extremely helpful called Birds Caribbean. And Lisa Sorensen is the head of that. She lives in Massachusetts. And they have trained guides, they have created information on their website. So if you're thinking of going there, feel free to call us for any, you know, advice or suggestions, but also pull up Birds Caribbean, one word.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. Thank you, everyone,
Yeah.
for joining us. And yes, have a lovely evening.
All right. Night.
Nice to see you all.
Yeah.